Is adjustable tyre pressure on a road bike a gimmick or a game changer? Well, in the next few days, we might get the answer. Earlier this week, a product was announced that would debut at Paris-Roubaix, the cobble classic, the Hell of the North. Or will it join a long list of products announced at this race but failed to live up to the hype? So in this video, we'll dive into the product in a bit more detail and what it's all about and what it means for Paris-Roubaix and bikes in general. And we'll also look back at some real tech bloopers over the years, and there are some real shockers, but also look at some bikes and tech developments that perhaps without this race might not exist. So let's dive in. So a Dutch company called Scope had developed a front hub-based system, basically with an air chamber linked via tubes and valves to a tubeless rim and tyre that allows you to adjust the tyre pressure up and down while you're riding your bike. There's controls on the handlebar to adjust the tyre pressure, and you get real-time actual feedback on your tyre pressure on your computer display. So you ride along, see your tyre pressure is lower or higher than you want, and adjust it via your controls. And yes, the UCI, the organisation that loves to ban new technology in the road bike world, have actually approved it. And Team DSM will be using the technology at Paris-Roubaix at the weekend. So all eyes will be on the team and this hub system to see whether it's a game changer or a gimmick. So the idea of adjustable tyre pressure for this race is fairly sound in theory. So you have long sections of relatively smooth tarmac where you want high tyre pressure for low rolling resistance, but then interrupted by brutal, savage cobbles where you want the tyre pressure as low as possible. So adjusting tyre pressure for the cobble sections and then the road sections in between could be a real benefit to the riders. And the other benefit and potential game changer in this race at least could be fixing and mending punctures on the fly. So this system is based around a tubeless tyre, and many teams are moving to tubeless for this race, and we saw the race won last year on Continental GP 5000 tubeless tyres, and apparently that rider had several punctures on his way to victory, but some riders weren't so lucky, as Moscon proved. Quite often with tubeless, when you do get a puncture, the system seals, the latex plugs a hole, but not before you lose some tyre pressure. And if you're riding normally, you might stop and inflate the tyres with a mini pump. But this system could allow you to top the tyre pressure up while riding and minimising the time you have to stop for a wheel change or a bike change. But outside of this race, with its unique set of demands, I'm unconvinced around the benefits this has for either top level racers or normal riders like you and I. How often do you ride on the road and wish you could adjust tyre pressure without the inconvenience of actually stopping, get your pump out to top up your tyres? But for gravel cycling, yes, I think this has really exciting implications for gravel, especially for a route with lots of gravel and off-road woodland trails, but interrupted by road. We might have a long road section to get to the woods to ride a gravel bike. So adjusting tyre pressure for the road, so higher pressure, and then lower for off-road could be a real benefit for gravel. But it's a long way from the developments we're seeing at Paris-Roubaix. However, as always, I'm open-minded to it, and until I try it, I'm not going to write it off. It could be a real interesting technology, or it might be a gimmick. Only time will tell. But the real issue is the price. It's not cheap. It's over €3,000. So it definitely puts it out of the realm for normal people like you and I. Definitely a pro-only thing. I'm sure that price isn't actually a real market price. It does remind me of Team GB back in 2012 when they had their special carbon fibre track bikes that technically you could buy, but they were over £30,000. And that was just to keep the UCI happy with this rule that anything used in pro level competition must be available to buy after 9 months in the shops. So when a product, if it becomes successful, does come to market at a reasonable price, it might be more interesting. Then there's the weight. Well, weight isn't really an issue for Paris-Roubaix. It's a flat race, no climbing. So weight really isn't a factor. Aero is a bigger factor for those road sections. But for normal riders who are concerned about weight, I know many of you are, the weight might offset the benefits it offers. So time will tell. So all eyes on Paris-Roubaix at the weekend to see how the team gets on with this system. And I doubt, to be honest, anyone from DSM going to win this race. I could be wrong. But it'd be interesting to see how many punches they do have or don't have during this 260 kilometre race. And I fully get that lots of people will be very dismissive of this as another gimmick by the bike industry trying to extract more money from you and trying to increase their profits. But I'm perhaps more positive and open-minded to the fact Paris-Roubaix is a very particular race, and riders, mechanics and product developers are trying to develop products that give their riders a competitive advantage. Whether it's aeroframes or wide tyres or suspension, we have seen some amazing developments that have benefited us all, whether you're racing or riding for fun and leisure. So more on that in a minute, but first, some real tech bloopers from the past. Firstly, back in 1990, Steve Bauer rode a crazy looking bike. It looked like it melted or had a really bad shunt. So apparently the head angle was a crazy 60 degrees, so really slack compared to even modern mountain bikes, and the seat angle just as slack. The idea was to lengthen the wheelbase and slacken off the angles compared to a road race bike of the time, and improve stability and make it a bit less agile and nimble to make it easier to ride and calmer to ride on cobbles and rough roads. And while the idea was very extreme, what we now see with endurance bikes developed at this race in latter years is a longer wheelbase and a slacker head angle than you get on a road race bike, but not as extreme as the example showed. So definitely a step too far. And then over the years, the other big developments have been around suspension. There's Cannondale with a Silk Road with a head shock. Trek did a soft tail that didn't end very well for George Hincapie. Bianchi had some success, sort of, with a full suspension bike, but ultimately a manufacturing issue led to that failing at a critical point for Johan Museeuw. But the most success of all came from RockShox with their suspension fork developed for the road bike based on their mountain bike technology, which did actually win a race on several occasions. And in more recent years, we've seen suspension being brought back and developed, but with limited success. So Pinarello for Team Sky developed a full suspension version of their Dogma race bike, had front and rear suspension developed by an Italian company called Hi-Ride, who now develop suspension for that BMC ERS LT I'm currently testing. So front and rear suspension, 10, 20 mil travel, so flexing carbon rear stays, suspension head shock ultimately basically in the front, and adjustable on the fly, or the computer sensor could do it for you, for the rider. But that didn't last very long. I think they used it at one race and then it was quietly kind of pushed to one side, and we've not seen anything since. So that hasn't developed into a long line of bikes from the company at all. So while it's easy to laugh at some of those tech fails, there are also some products and developments for this race that we all take for granted today. And perhaps the biggest one is the endurance road bike. So bikes like the Trek Domani, Specialized Roubaix and Cannondale Synapse were all bikes developed for this race to give the riders an advantage in this cobble classic, and bikes which are hugely popular with consumers around the world. And what these bikes all have in common are features and design focus to give the riders a smoother ride and more control on the cobble classics, which actually translate really well to real world conditions where the roads are far from smooth. And one of the biggest ones has come from the introduction of disc brakes, allowing much wider tyres than before. Then you had that geometry, so longer wheelbase, slacker angles, and a road race bike, so more stability, more control on rough roads and cobbles. And with the likes of the Trek Domani and Specialized Roubaix, the reintroduction of suspension, sort of, in a way that actually works, in a way it didn't really work back in the 90s. And right now, one of the most exciting and interesting developments at this race, in my opinion, is the development of wide tubeless tyres like this one here. So last year, the Continental Grand Prix 5000 STR was used to win the race, and quite a few teams were using it. Even Ineos Grenadiers were using these tyres, although not so successfully for Moscon. But maybe if he had that tubeless inflating system that DSM are using, it might have been okay. And yes, I know tubeless isn't perfect yet. I admit that, I recognise that. Compatibility issues with tyres and rims can be an issue, but it's getting much better all the time. And with that focus on this race, on the technology, I think we can see it being pushed forward in a really exciting way, and hopefully benefit us all in the same way that endurance bikes have benefited us all in terms of riding normal roads in comfort and speed as well. So Paris-Roubaix is always an exciting race to watch, and also interesting to watch from a tech point of view as well. New bikes, tyres, wheels and other developments. So I'll be watching the bikes very closely as well as racing action to see what we might see displayed at the race for the first time. But that's all for today. If you want to see a video on how to set up your tuber tyres, then check this video right here. And don't forget to subscribe by hitting the button just here. But that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all again very soon.